Well, we're here to discuss your cinematic baby, Honeydew.
Yes,
And
indeed.
most first-time features tend to, particularly within the genre, tend to stick to sort of safer areas, more, generic, more conventional. But Honeydew is, I guess you could consider to be, quite risky in, some of the areas that it goes, some of the themes and whatnot that it explores. What made you decide that this had to be, your first feature-length film that, you put out into the world?
Yeah, so I had been developing a feature adaptation of a George Saunders short story called The 400-Pound CEO, and I'd been doing that for I think at the time it was almost 2 years, year and a half. And my friend Dan, who shot Honeydew, is also a producer on it, texted me. I had been feeling sort of discouraged about how long it was taking to get it moving, 400-Pound CEO. And he essentially texted me and said, "Do you want to do a horror?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you want to do it? Are you up for shooting it next month?" Which was December. I think at this point it was December of 2017. And I said, "Yeah." And it was sort of initially started as very small scale, something we considered, we'd cast and crew our friends and raise a couple thousand. But it was the seed of it was opportunity to make a film, because I was just extremely restless, and I hadn't really directed anything at that point in almost 2 years. I was doing music videos and short films before that, and at the time I was just working as an editor and developing various scripts. So I was anxious to just make something and just throw myself headfirst into directing. And I was, I essentially was given an opportunity to write it, and that was a huge plus. And yeah, I just sort of ran with this seed idea that Dan and I developed of a couple on a camping trip, which we both love horror, and figured with all of his access to New England and rural area, we would be able to do it on the cheap to some degree. And that was also appealing. So we sort of started out with a bit of a more basic tropey concept in it, and sort of went wild from there.
I mean, it features a fictitious fungus, which is, I guess, based on some element of reality. I'm guessing you guys, did you have to do much research into, creating something that, although fictitious, is, entirely plausible?
Yeah, it's based on ergot, which is typically found in rye, and is not as common today. I think it was pretty common. It was like Sortico. It was first discovered or became an issue in terms of its poisonous effects on humans in medieval times. And then I had been sent an article right when I had just sort of started writing Honeydew, and before I had considered any Sortico or any sort of fungal element. And it was ergot, about a small village in France called, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Saint-Pont-Esprit, or Esprit. And there's about a mass poisoning there in the 1950s, where everyone, or not everyone, but a small village, so a number of people in the town, I think between 250 to 500 people, were poisoned by this bread, this fungal rye bread from the local bakery, and developed these sort of horrifying symptoms like gangrene and hallucinations, and a number of them had to be committed to asylums. And that was just sort of really appealing to me as either a plot or a subplot, and something to sort of apply as a through line. And So I sort of wove that into Sam and Rylie's story, going into this, the world of Karen and Euless and Goonie, and saw it as an effective way to sort of create their personalities even, and make them crazier and give them a reason for their craziness, a reason for their this sort of religious, dogmatic, I guess, insanity that they ultimately inflict upon Sam and Rylie. But yeah, and then I fictionalized it a bit, just to give me some room to sort of expand upon the symptoms and not be sort of nitpicked on how I wove those in.
Yeah. I mean, and a big portion of the film does sort of revolve around food. Normally, you know, when you see food in film, it's like, oh my God, give me that piece of cake, give me the, I want to eat it, it looks delicious. This film, I did not find that, the food looks thoroughly unpleasant, even when it's, quite, mundane things. Did you guys, did you shoot it in a certain way to try and elicit that feeling of like disgust from people?
Not specifically for the first portion of the film. The art for the food was fairly limited. And we didn't necessarily, we wanted everything to be very much sort of implicit. So any nods to the food being inedible, we sort of held back on, or being unusual or tasting weird. Like you can see as when they're eating at the dinner table, they don't react to the food either looking or tasting odd. That doesn't really come till later. And so I sort of like the idea of delaying the grotesque elements till later, and that included any visuals of actual human flesh being detached, or like overt hinting at the fact that they may be eating something other than cow. And then, so some of that is incidental. It just might be that the implication of it is enough to throw you off your appetite. But later on, it did. The intention, once they are sort of reaches its the film reaches its climax, and Karen is feeding what is in the box. That was certainly deliberate in making the meat look as unappealing as possible. And that wasn't even, actually, that wasn't real meat. That was vegan meat. But there's a way that the vegan meat looks in strips that I thought looked a bit more terrifying and unappetizing.
I guess sort of continuing, with the, into the realm of production design, I really like the aesthetic of the film. The house, particular, both inside and outside, really helped ramp up that element of an uneasy atmosphere. How much of that was in situ, and how much did you guys have to bring to it to create that environment?
Yeah, the house is actually a really cool, beautiful old house that had a really sort of normal, nice owner, and is used, I think, part of the year. We Airbnb'd the actual picture house. So yeah, a bunch of it was production design. Was Kendra Eves, who was our, for better or worse, our one woman art department. I say one woman, but she had some help here and there from PAs and even from hair and makeup. But yeah, we went through sheets and sheets and sheets of wallpaper to find the right wallpaper for the right rooms and the right colors and the right themes. And her applying her special degree of decay and vintage, and sort of vintage fringe, is really what created or helped to create that world. And even from down to like, radiators, we brought in radiators to, because I think they had floor vents. So we brought in radiators to sort of heighten that sense of heat and discomfort. And to, everything was sort of in an effort to make the house breathe in its own sort of diseased, infirm way. And the basement, I'd say the basement was a lot closer to, what you'd expect a basement to be. And there was a creep factor there just in the fact that it wasn't a furnished basement, but we still were able to sort of apply some bibs and bobs and objets to sort of heighten the more surreal elements of that part of the world, that level. But yeah, no, there was definitely a lot of design that went into upping the creep factor, so to speak.
No, it definitely comes across, and it definitely works. I mean, the other thing that I really liked when I was watching it is, I mean, split screen in TV and film, it was around a lot. I guess sort of particularly around like the start of 24. It was in every film and TV show going, but it's kind of disappeared. But you brought it back here for some elements in Honeydew. What made you decide to tell your narrative with this visual method?
Yeah, it was a combination of things. One was in keeping somewhat with that sort of art school element of a lot of De Palma's films, which I love and which I started on as a kid, like The Fury and Sisters and Carrie, and older and Hitchcock films that had a big influence on me. Another element was an effort to keeping with that sort of theme of cutting and slicing, and infusing the narrative and the characters with that as a theme, and sort of finding ways to separate Sam and Rylie visually, while showing them at the same time if they're in different places. And yeah, that lent itself to sound that I thought could disrupt a scene that seemed relatively benign. Specifically, and it rarely is there a scene in this film that seems entirely benign. But if Rylie is talking to Karen before the tension sort of builds, we see Sawyer, we see Sam up in the bathroom going through something completely separate, which sort of in some ways sparks the tension that builds in this separate place, which I have always really liked that effect. And it also, in a more practical sense, it cuts time. It allows me to not have, especially since I'm the director, I was the director and the editor, allowed me to sort of not have to leave a scene to go to another scene. And it definitely, cut some time down.
I mean, I guess my next question is, what do you hope that the viewer experiences when they sit down to watch Honeydew? Hopefully without a plate full of food. What do you hope that they experience?
I hope they feel like they've entered another world, and that the texture of the film in and of itself leaves an impression, and that even if they don't fully enjoy the film for the first watch, or are left with questions, or are left feeling uncomfortable, or even dissatisfied by certain elements, that it makes them want to see it again. So that, because those for me are the films that I wind up loving the most, and that have the longest lasting effect on me. I mean, I think The Shining is one of those that I think for a lot of people, when it came out in 1980, there was a lot of mixed reactions to it. And on one hand, there's clearly this element of masterpiece and scale, And on the other hand, there's people who had a problem with the fact that it didn't directly, didn't reflect the best elements of the original story in the original book. And that is one that as a kid, I was just like, because I saw it when I was fairly young, I didn't have any of that as a reference. But then as I got older and I continued to watch it, I saw, oh, well, this is kind of weird and silly. And then I would see how it had an effect outside of the fact that it seemed kind of separate and at first inconsequential. So I hope that, you know, it does capture people, at least at the outset, even if, you know, there's questions and there's sort of things left to revisit.
I guess then finally, have you had a chance to start working on what's next, start thinking about what you're going to follow it up with?
Yeah, so I'm still working on the 400-pound CEO, the Saunders film, and I've developed another feature called Jasper, working title, which is about a guy that returns to the scene of a childhood trauma at his family's old summer house nearly 3 decades after it happened, to sort of confront the event, and in so doing is met with an assault by a strange landscaper who lives and works in the area. And as the film progresses, he realizes that that there's something at work amidst his neighbors and the sort of surrounding people in the community to sort of thwart his efforts to stay in the house and come to terms with what happened.
Well, I look forward to seeing it.